Welcome to a special bonus episode of So Much Crime, So Little Time. I'm Dee.
And I'm Jeff, and we recently covered Lords of Death, which was nominated for Best True Crime Podcast at this year's Ambies.
We just got the opportunity to chat with the host of that podcast and the investigative lead behind the entire story, Thrasher Banks.
As a reminder, Thrasher Banks was 6 years old when his mother's boyfriend, Mick, was involved in the murder of a sex worker named Cindy.
As an adult, Thrasher discovered a memory box his mom had kept. It had all kinds of artifacts from the crime: VHS tapes of police interviews, news articles, letters from his mom to Mick.
So Lords of Death, the podcast, is about Thrasher's journey to discover what really happened on that night back in 1995.
We really hope you enjoy this discussion. Yeah, welcome to Thrasher Banks. Thank you so much for joining us, the host of Lords of Death. I'd love to start to hear, was it really the memory box that kind of twigged something in you to say, like, this is the story that needs to be told? Or was there another reason that you decided this should be a podcast? Or did you just want to do a podcast and you were trying to figure out some ideas and the memory box connected? Like, how did that start?
Yeah, I can go into that. So after the storm blew over and Mick and Tim went to prison, me and my mom and my sister moved into my grandparents' house in the suburbs, and we pretty much stopped talking about Mick. My mom met someone new, and she sat me down and was like, just, don't talk about what happened with your friends. This is just something to keep, I hate to say secret, but basically told me not to discuss it with anyone. And so it just sat in the back of my mind for so long, wondering what happened to Mick. I knew the story, and I knew it happened even as a 6-year-old, but I didn't have all the details. I didn't know much about Tim, only what I remembered about him. So as I got older and got into college, learning how to use databases for research and pulling newspaper articles, because back then they didn't have newspapers.com. We're talking 2008. So I started pulling all the articles from the Dayton Daily News and reading about it, and I couldn't help but bring it up with mom and talk to her about it. So there were a couple of years where we had secret discussions, when no one was around. I would get little snippets from her.
At that point, was she open to talking to you about it because you were an adult at that stage? That she was comfortable with having those conversations. If you said obviously when you were younger, she didn't want you to speak about it to other people.
Yeah, and I don't think it was that she was uncomfortable talking with me about it necessarily. I think she wanted to protect us, and if we told our friends, maybe we would be judged in some way. Because, we went from the inner city to the suburbs. So there's a big cultural and socioeconomic change happening. But then she had met she met Ben, who became my stepdad. And I just don't think she wanted us talking about Mick around Ben. Because if you listen in the last episode, there was a period where she was still talking to Mick, but it was also with Ben, and had to make the difficult decision to cut Mick off. So, I think it was just a way to protect us. And when we started talking about it when I was in college, she was completely open. And that's when she told me about the Potts murders. So that piqued my interest, of course. And back then there was no information about the Potts murders. So it was just this mysterious, unsolved murder that was seemingly forgotten at the time. So I felt compelled to find out any information I could about that. And really all I had at that point was a Dayton Daily News article about the Cindy Cozad murder, and Arnold Van Horn, who was the detective from Guernsey County, which is where Tim's from. It's about 2.5 hours from here in Dayton. He showed up at our house on Rowe Avenue in Dayton before he moved to my grandparents, and was asking my mom if she knew anything about these murders. So that was mentioned in the Dayton Daily News article. So that was all I had at that point. And then in 2012, there was the blog post that a local from Guernsey County posted about the murders. So my mom found that and sent it to me. And at that point, I was feeling extremely compelled to find out more about this because, in my mind, if Tim was a serial killer, if he was involved in these murders and part of this gang called the Lords of Death, I felt somehow that would absolve Mick of his culpability in Cindy's murder and potentially even help him as he moved through the parole board system. You know, I was young in my early 20s at that time, so I was definitely being naive and thinking that that would somehow help. But
It's interesting to me that, and we discussed this a little bit in our review, but that obviously you and Kari, your mom, at that age, you look back and you were saying Mick was trying to save us. And even at that stage, you seem to be doing what you could in order to help him, which I found so moving throughout the podcast because I feel like the easier option, and maybe the option that more people than not would have taken, was actually over the years look back and find reasons to distance yourself from someone who's in prison for this or who has brought any of this trauma into your life. But you and your mom really stuck to it and said, like, you know, we believe that he was out there. He was a good person at his core and he must have been trying to save us.
yeah, and honestly, I was looking for anything to change my mind on that so I could kind of put it to rest. You know, it's like,
Mm.
okay, my mom fed me this story, and I talked about that in the podcast a little bit. You know, my mom fed me this story because she doesn't want me to look back and judge her for being with this man. But I also have my memories of Mick, and he was just a very, and still is a very gentle guy. If he the people he loves, he'll do anything for them. I'm not saying he's perfect. You know, he went to Centerville to fight that guy in episode 2. I'm sure he was up to other criminal activities while living in Dayton. I mean, I don't know for sure, but like I mentioned earlier, you know, there's a big socioeconomic factor here. Most of the people in the podcast were living in poverty at one point, um, my family included. So yeah, I was looking for anything to kind of shift my opinion so I could let this go in my mind and move on because it really just kind of festered for so long.
I can
And
imagine.
there's like this feeling that while justice was served and people were held responsible for Cindy's death, it's like, is that actually justice though if Mick really had no intentions of harming Cindy and just got caught up in this situation that was completely out of his control?
Yeah. That's so interesting. And do you know one thing that springs to mind here is you mentioned at the very start of, I think, the start of episode 1, how, which was such a moving opening. Jeff and I both like spoke about it in our preview, how we really liked it, but how, you know, how tapes warp over time. And I wonder, is that what you were trying to do when you say, like, you were nearly looking for a way of closing this? Were you thinking maybe my memories have been warped over time? Maybe my mom's memories have been warped over time, and they're, you know, she's trying to put the shine on it so that it doesn't, you know, fester into more trauma for you. And so you're trying to look to see, like, how much of my memories were solid? Like, how much was this person really a good and kind and gentle person?
Yeah, that's definitely the big theme of Lords of Death as I'm speaking with everyone throughout the podcast. And Jeff, you caught on to the unreliable narrators. There are a lot of
Yeah.
those in this story, and myself included. Frankly, yeah, that's I mean that was a big part of it. So I had my memories, I had my mom's memories, and then I had this box which had facts and
Mm.
objectivity. So they kind of countered one another, brought some balance to my investigation. or journey, whatever, however you want to look at it.
I wanted to ask a little bit about your about the box, but also about your mom. I'm curious, like how did working on this podcast? I mean, it seems like you've been working on this now for a lot of years of this research. I'm curious how this affected your relationship with her, but also like how like was it difficult to get her to participate in this?
Yeah, so I have been, I did work on it for a long time. It started, I got the box in 2012, and I was really thinking about writing a book. Had some false starts on that, and then started working in an office and noticed everyone wearing headphones. And I'm like, what music are they listening to? And like, oh, we're listening to podcasts. You got to check out S Town. And
Hmm.
as soon as I heard S Town, I knew that was the medium I needed to use, because the intimacy and the use of literary devices and plot to tell a story, I knew it was the perfect medium. And my mom was a little apprehensive at first, mostly because of Jim, the alleged leader of the Lords of Death.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of fear because she felt the information that she had about the Potts murders, that so few people knew about Tim and Jim's potential involvement, that she thought that that would make her a target. But we worked through that, and she eventually opened up to it. We sat down, and most of the audio you hear from her is from one session in 2018.
Wow.
So that was quite a few years ago. Now that it's come out as a podcast, it's been, I think, seemingly very successful. How does she feel about her participation in it now?
Yeah, I don't want to speak for her too much, but I can go off conversations we've had. She likes the podcast. She's always tracking the reviews, sending me the reviews whenever she sees one pop up, good or bad. She listened to your reviews too. But no, I think she's very happy with how it turned out. Even back when all this happened, some people, I won't name any names, but blamed my mom and were mad at her over what happened. So she never got to tell her story. Like, she went to all the trials and depositions and everything she had to go through completely alone while trying to raise two kids and working full time at a factory. So this was her chance to finally tell the story. So a lot of what you hear her saying, I was also learning for the first time, just because of that initial like 3 or 4 hour interview we did. Everything just flowed and came out. I didn't even have questions. It was just a conversation.
That's incredibly intense and also so moving. I wonder, like, did that and this entire podcast bring you guys closer together?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we went through, it's a shared trauma, right? So I think this was a healing process for both of us in a sense. And working together on a podcast, I mean, certainly brought us closer together. And to have like a product and something that will be out there, forever, is pretty incredible. I think we both recognize that.
Yeah, and like I can imagine, like from a mother's perspective, I can imagine her being so proud of what you have put together, like on the side. This is not like your full-time gig. You're not. There wasn't like a big production behind it or a big investigation, a big team, from what I can tell on it. But also you must be so proud of her, because obviously she went through this trauma at the time and she was trying to really protect you and her and your sister. But also throughout the podcast, what we noted was she was so raw and she was so candid. And that has to have been, as you say, a healing journey, but it has to have been so difficult for her to do and so incredibly brave. So I can imagine you feeling that proud of her and then her feeling proud of you. I just can't imagine. It just feels like such a kind of a beautiful moment at the end of this trauma for the two of you.
Yeah, I've wondered what the podcast would have been like if I wasn't the one that did all the investigating and all the interviews. But Dee, you are correct. There was not a big production behind this. By the time Tenderfoot got involved, I had already recorded probably 90% of the interviews.
Whoa.
I did a couple with my mom like last year, but I mean, everything was already recorded, and we had a very small team. I mean, Tenderfoot's a small company, anyways. But I had 2 producers I worked with that helped me craft everything into a cohesive narrative.
So we definitely talked in our episodes on this about kind of the unreliable narrator element of this, and as well as like how, I mean, this was obviously a theme, like you said, like you're dealing with your own memories. You were very young when this all happened. One thing I was curious to ask you about was kind of what you were just saying of what if you weren't the host? Like, did you? This seems like this was very much like a personal project for you, and I think it was more powerful because you were the host. But was that ever something you thought about? Like, should I of not being at the center of this?
So not from a hosting perspective, because I always knew that's a tough question. But no, I always wanted to be the host, but I put a lot of thought into what kind of host do I want to be? Do I want to be this almost self-righteous true crime podcaster trope that goes out to like solve the case and save the day? And no, I obviously didn't want to take that route. I really just wanted to let all of my subjects speak and not counter them or try to dissect anything they said that might be unreliable. I wanted to leave that to the listeners, and I really took a show not tell approach, which in true crime probably isn't the best way to tell a story, but to me that was important because I wanted the audience to really put themselves in everyone's shoes as they were listening instead of having me interpret everything, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder if part of the reason behind that was you said your mum didn't have a chance to tell her side of the story back when this was all occurring. So I wonder if whether you considered when you made that decision of the show not tell, are you saying let's give everyone a chance to tell their side of the story? Let's not make judgment, let's not make interpretations. Let's say this is whoever is telling their side of the story, it's their side to tell, not someone else's to dissect or judge or come after, but just giving them that space.
Oh, absolutely. And I even got emails or an email from someone that lived in Guernsey County, which is where Tim was from and where the Potts murders happened. And they were just thanking me for not disparaging their community and giving their community a voice when it would have been easy for me to cast judgment on their lifestyle. I mean, it's another area with a lot of poverty. So it's good to hear that the route I took resonated with locals. I mean, a lot of times podcasters get shit from locals for
Hmm.
coming into a town and just really not understanding the culture and politics. So,
Taking what they want and going with it and not seeing the whole picture.
exactly. So yeah, that was something that I considered as I told this story.
Hmm. What it's hard to move away from your mom because like what a person, like from everything we heard throughout the podcast. I adored her. She was seemed so strong and so brave. Um and not afraid to look back and say, maybe I made wrong decisions or had bad judgment or whatever, but this is what happened. But one thing that was so remarkable is in the chaos of that night in particular of Cindy's murder. She just shows these like remarkable, seemingly calm detective skills. She assesses the car and the men after the murder. She discovers the piece of clothing. She preserves the evidence in a bag. We have discussed podcasts where we have heard of trained police officers not doing this. And is there a story behind there? Like, was she a detective on the side in a previous life? Like, what is happening there? It's really impressive.
Yeah, that's a good observation. I can't speak for her other than she just went into from the adrenaline and situation, just went on. I don't know. I can't even imagine. But yeah, she like did all the right things to
It's
ensure
wild.
that we got out of the house, that there was at least something that would tie Mick and Tim to the murders, and then she made a difficult decision to turn them in, which put Tim, who could be a serial killer, behind bars. And yeah, it's heroic.
Really is.
Yeah, I think it's hard to understate just how, and correct me if I'm misreading, but like how vulnerable of a position she was in, right? Like she had these two young kids and she didn't seem to have a ton of options, but it seems like she really did make like some very strong decisions, some very good decisions. On the topic of Tim, so he's in prison for life. Is that right? Does he have a possibility of parole?
He does. He got 30 years to life on aggravated murder and aggravated robbery with eligibility for parole. So he is up for parole, I believe, next year, maybe this year.
Oh wow.
I do send a letter to the parole board every time he's advocating against his release.
How much of a concern is there for you or for your mom about him getting out?
Yeah, major concerns. It's yeah, she's we've had that discussion several times. The concern is Tim and Jim are inevitably going to like still be friends. Jim still visits Tim in prison. He signed his house over to Tim. It's like Tim owns a house in Byesville, which is in Guernsey County. And even Detective Van Horn, when I first talked to him about doing an interview, he was afraid of Tim. He's like, I don't want to do anything where I discuss Tim and these murders because he's going to get out soon and I'm on his list. And Van Horn was literally on his list. Tim had told Mick and my mom that there were like 5 people he wanted to kill. Van Horn, the sheriff, Sheriff Carpenter, and then a blonde and a brunette, but no names associated with those two. Which I found that out from the case file for Leela Potts's murder, which was sent to me in error by Guernsey County because the clerk didn't realize it was a cold case. They thought it was just some solved murder case
Whoa.
and sent me that. And yeah, Van Horn's notes from when he came to Dayton were there, which laid out a bunch of stuff that my mom didn't remember that she had told him.
Wow.
That's both chilling but also fascinating. How that actually reminds me of another question I wanted to ask. In the memory box that your mom kept, there were police interrogation tapes. Do I have that right? Like that's the VHS tapes that kind of begins the podcast, I think.
Mm-hmm.
How did she get those?
Yeah, so when Mick was in jail at the Montgomery County Jail awaiting trial, he got his discovery packet from the prosecutor, which had all the files and everything in the VHS tape, everything that was going to be used at the trial. And when Mick was, after his trial was done and he got transferred to Lucasville, like a max security prison, my mom had to take all of his stuff. So that's why I have all the letters, the VHS tapes, the letters my mom wrote to Mick. I have those too. And I was able to line them all up like chronologically. And I read through, hundreds of letters of the back and forth between them, which is super interesting. And I wish I could have discussed it in the podcast, but I had so much content already. We had to cut so much. So yeah, she got all of that from Mick's cell. And my grandma found another box actually, which is how I got the news clips. There was a VHS tape in there where my mom had recorded all of the news coverage because the local stations just didn't have them archived. So my grandma saved a little piece of history there.
Yeah. Wow. On the note of you said, there was more in that box, and this is something I was going to leave to closer to the end. But Have you considered the podcast idea of like digging into the memory box and even using it as like a way of telling other people's stories, like reaching out and seeing if other people have memory boxes that have uncovered things from their past? Because this memory box starting this whole thing off, well, not starting, because obviously you lived through the trauma, but it was so fascinating because not everyone is a record keeper, or they're record keepers, but it's online. So don't bother telling me a story that you've told me back in 2005 on your Facebook because I saw it already. But, you know, I don't know. I find that whole concept of the memory box so fascinating. And I just wonder, have you considered like using it as a stimulus or using it as a starter for like a future story to tell us?
It's a good question. You know, I was thinking about the memories and how there's a big gap in millennials like record where we're all using digital cameras and like MySpace, and like all of that's lost now. So there's like missing history of all of our lives. But as far as telling someone else's story, I don't think I could. Yeah, I think someone, that's tough. I hope someone is inspired by the podcast and does it and goes through that journey and feels seen, less alone if they may have been repressing any sort of trauma. So, I mean, think how many children in the U.S. have went through similar situations that haven't told their stories. So that was one of my hopes as I put this out there.
I would find it really hard to believe that there's not a number of people who are inspired by not only the fact that you've told your story and the way that you told your story, but the rawness, and I said the candidness and the open and honest way that you and your mum told it. I would be shocked if people weren't impressed by that. One other person, I know from your Instagram that you mentioned the reason as to why Cindy, who was obviously the victim of the murder at the centre of the story, that you wanted to keep her out. And I respected that. As soon as I read it, it made a lot of sense. I would like to ask, obviously without betraying any trust, if you can talk more about your thoughts on that. Did you want to focus on her in the story? Did you feel like it was yours and your mother's story to tell, and you would take that side of it and that perspective of it throughout the story? Or maybe like, how do you think that the absence of Sydney and Sydney's story might have impacted the podcast?
Yeah, so there's very little known about Cindy Cozad. If you get online, you'll find nothing. Her gravestone. So that it was tough. And I'm still in touch with one of her siblings, and we had a lot of discussions about it. We wanted to do it, and it didn't work out for various reasons out of my control. But I do still stay in touch with that sibling, and both Cindy's parents had passed by the time I started doing this. And like the Instagram post said, I didn't want to speak for Cindy. I didn't want to try to fill in gaps or tell an audience something that's not authentic. I mean, I do know some about her background. I mean, it's very similar to Mick and Tim. Growing up in culturally, economically depressed areas in Upper Appalachia, and being caught up in the system, a system that failed all of them, which led to cycles and consequences, I think, that could have been mitigated if our criminal justice system didn't perpetuate those cycles to kind of prevent people from rising above their circumstances. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And do you know, I can't help but think, because of your closeness to the story and because you went through all of this from being a young child, and you realized how much your mother had gone through as well, that you took that more sensitive, empathetic and respectful approach. And there's obviously, I feel like every podcast, every story could be told differently. And there is a world where you aren't the host, and there is a world where someone is telling the story in a more objective way. but they're not going to have that emotion. They're not going to have that feeling that it is important not to speak for someone. As you said, when you were letting people tell their side of the story, you're not going to tell the side of the story for anyone in here. And I just feel like your closeness to this entire story likely led to you making such a respectful decision. And it's probably one, and I don't know, I'm not sure, but like I noticed it in some of the Reddit reviews that people were saying, what about Cindy? What about Cindy? And I kind of had thought that as well until I had seen your Instagram post. And so I feel like probably the easier option for you as a host would have been to talk about her and to talk for her and to colour her in whatever way that you felt you could with those facts. But you didn't take the easier option. Kind of similar to how you and your mum didn't allow time to negatively colour your vision or your memories of Mick. You went down that harder route. And I don't know, I think it's another reason why the objectivity of the storyteller is kind of, it's the unique factor in this podcast. It's the strength of this podcast, as opposed to being something that we should, like, I don't know, consider how we could tell it differently to fit the mold of maybe other true crime podcasts.
Yeah, and I felt that the what my mom said about Cindy in the last episode and the interactions I had with her family members, and like the picture they sent me, they took the picture of the flowers I left in the shelter there, and put Cindy in the background. I felt that was enough of a tribute to her that I didn't need to go into known facts. But I will share one snippet. She's from Logan, Ohio, which is in southern Ohio, and she was just trying to get enough money to get back to Logan. That was what the detectives learned from someone she was living with. And yeah, sadly, she crossed paths with Tim, but she was trying to get back to Logan and get her life back on track after, like I said earlier, just being caught up in the criminal justice system.
I feel like there are multiple victims in this story. And I think, we got to hear that through these other stories that sort of all relate to the central story about Cindy, even though Cindy is not very, very present. I thought that was just very effective. I wanted to ask, Dee alluded to some of the like Reddit reviews and things that some of the feedback. I'm curious just your take on sort of the response, like everything from obviously we discovered this because it was nominated for an Ambie. And so I'm curious to hear about your experience with that.
Oh, wow.
But I'm just curious about, the sort of spectrum of feedback and how that's gone for you.
Yeah, it's always, you guys have been doing this for a long time now. It always hurts, right? Whenever there's a negative comment, but you start to become numb to it. I really just focused on the people that were reaching out to me, telling me how much the story meant to them. That is why I did it. Well, that's not why I did it, but that's what keeps me going,
Gets you through the negative voices out there who just didn't get it. Like, that's what it comes down to, I think.
Yeah, and I was prepared. The true crime community audience, they have so many options now to listen to, where like in 2018 or something, there were just so few true crime podcasts out there, narrative true crime at least, that I feel like people were less judgmental. But now it's like, oh, I don't like this guy's voice, so I'm not going to listen and I'm going to criticize him online. That's just how it is. I prepared myself for it. And I knew everyone wouldn't like it because I took a different approach. So I was operating in the true crime medium, but there were other layers that I incorporated into the podcast, tried to use metaphors and symbolism throughout to kind of create a subtext. Like I mentioned earlier, the show not tell. I incorporated a lot of my own music into the podcast that came in at key moments that is very different than typical like true crime background music. So I knew I was doing something a little bit different that not everyone would like.
Given that this is like a side gig and this was like a passion project that you were working on for so long, and putting your own music, I didn't realize that. That's really cool. Were you shocked when you got nominated for an Ambie?
Yeah, that I didn't even know that I was in the running for it, and then Donald Albright from Tenderfoot let me know, and yeah, I mean it's kind of weird, honestly, because I made this whole podcast in this spare bedroom here where I'm sitting now, after work in my free time, and yeah, it's really unreal. But when I saw the other nominees, I knew that Lords of Death wouldn't win because have you guys listened to Beyond All Repair?
Oh, no.
It's one of the best podcasts I've ever heard. Season 3, I knew they were going to win, and they did.
But to be nominated obviously shows, like, as you said, it's flooded out there. True crime podcasts are flooded, and to be nominated, to be like your first side passion project, it shows you're doing something right because you stood out from the mold. You stood out from the other podcasts.
Yeah, and a lot of that goes to the team at Tenderfoot just helping me put together the narrative, because it really was a team effort after Tenderfoot got involved, and I was really crafting the episodes. Dennis Cooper from Culpable was one of the producers, and Meredith Stedman, she does Rattled and Shook is her podcast. She works on most of the Tenderfoot podcast. We transcribed all the interviews and put them in a Google Doc and built the scripts, and we were very careful about every detail that we put in the final version. And we cut a lot of content.
You mentioned the music, and there were so many of these, I think, kind of subtle touches of things that one of the things I liked about it was I didn't think you drew too much attention to it, and that includes that some of those metaphors, like that. I mean, that beginning metaphor of the VHS tape being warped, which I think was really effective, and I thought was also, to your point about millennials, I feel like it's one of those things that maybe younger people don't know about or don't remember how that's a thing, but for those of us who are a little older, definitely a thing that I remember. That I really appreciated how you just sort of wove those things in throughout. I don't know. I mean, this is such a different story and unique story. I feel like it does really stand out from the pack, and it is such a saturated market, I guess, of true crime podcasts and stories. Yeah, I don't know. This is one I feel like I'm going to keep coming back to and thinking about for a while. So I don't know. I really admire and respect what you did.
I have one question that I kind of wanted to ask and then I kind of didn't want to ask. But like, do you reckon when your mother was naming you Thrasher Banks, like I said it at the start, like this is a host's name. This is a lead man's name, Thrasher Banks. Like, what a deadly name. Was there like a family connection here with this, or did she just say he's destined for something fantastic?
So it's not my real name.
Ah, stop it.
Sorry to disappoint you. But I'm
really disappointed.
So my mom wanted my mom wanted to name me Thrasher because it's an old family name. My grandmother's family's from Kentucky, Wolf County, Kentucky, and yeah, Thrasher was one of our like great uncles. She wanted to name me that, but my dad was not about that, so I got Matthew instead. But yeah, Banks is my grandmother's maiden name, and I needed a way to separate myself, my podcasting gig from my professional life, and the name helped, just so I didn't have to have that conversation with coworkers at the office.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But no, using the name just felt right.
I love that it's not just like a nickname though. Like it broke my heart a little bit when you said it wasn't your real name. But now that it's like, well, it's a family name and you leaned into what your mum had originally wanted to call you, I think we're still good. It's such a savage. I love it. It's such a savage name. So that is one thing I wanted to say that I couldn't say in the midst of all of our serious conversation. The last thing I have is, what's next for you? Like, you kind of have said you don't feel like telling someone else's story would be something you'd be interested in a podcast, but would you consider another podcast? It feels like you've mentioned a couple of times how you cut a lot of the material out of this podcast, and I wonder, do you see yourself leaning into more of, do you feel like there's more of a story here?
So there's 3 more episodes coming.
Oh,
Yeah, they're not part of. I don't think they're going to be like 9, 10, and 11, just because the 8 episodes are just such a complete arc. But it's 3 separate episodes to kind of go into more detail about things, more into Pete, who was Tim's friend, the gravelly voice from episode 5. I actually went out to his property after he passed and was looking for a body that was allegedly buried out there. And when I found
You went out yourself to look for the body?
with his sister, yeah. And then when we found the spot, it had been dug up. So
like
if there was
recently dug up, or
um,
I mean, if you
so
noticed
I
it.
figured out who dug it up and talked to them, and it was in like 2004. So if there was a body there, it was moved around that time.
wait, so this is going to be in the upcoming episodes?
Yeah.
Whoa.
So there's a little
Add
snippet.
it to the list, Jeff.
That's
We
a-
have
that's
to
a-
talk about those.
It's a really good
I know.
teaser. When are those
Yeah, it
coming out?
really is.
I'm hoping like June or July. It takes a long time to make these episodes. Just all the editing. You know how it is when you're editing audio and clipping and all of that. So yeah, hopefully this summer though.
Okay.
That's
All right.
amazing. Also, I nodded along to like when you're editing the audio, and I'm like, Jeff does that. I don't do it.
Well, and you do it on a whole other level than we do. I think you're
Well, yeah.
the amount of editing, I think, is significantly more than our little show.
Absolutely. Oh my God, I'm so excited to hear the next 3 episodes.
Yeah, Jeff, I have one thing for you.
Sure.
You said it was clumsy that I used the song names for the titles,
I actually was going to bring that up. Yeah.
but there's some significance. Like those are all songs that are tied in some way to like a memory with the people involved for the most part.
Okay.
Oh,
What
wow.
was there a reason you didn't like call that out? I guess maybe that's a awkward thing to call out in the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of just an Easter egg. But like "Heartache Tonight" by the Eagles, that was the song like of my childhood when Mick and Tim were around. If you listen to the lyrics, it says like somebody's gonna hurt someone before the night is done. Someone's gonna come undone. It's just very creepy how
Yeah.
similar that is. And then "Angel of Death" is a Slayer song. Mick was a huge Slayer fan, so that just seemed fitting.
And what, Downward Spiral, 9 Inch Nails? Is that
Yeah, that's just what everybody was listening to in 94, 95.
I was gonna say I was listening to that in that time. And then what, Runaway Train with Soul Asylum, I think, or is that a different song that you
Yeah, so Soul Asylum. I mean, my mom was obsessed with that song.
Okay.
And it just
I had that on. I had it on cassette. I had that album.
Yep.
Listened to it a lot.
So did she. I remember the 2 kids on the front of it.
Yep.
Now, Jeff, put back into your box.
Yeah. No, that's that's fair. Well, I guess we should probably wrap up. But Thrasher, this was so great. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. I feel like this just sort of expanded my appreciation for Lords of Death and the work you did. So I really loved getting to hear more about your process and about your experience with this. So yeah, thank you so much for this time.
Yeah, really appreciate it. And I know obviously originally when we reached out, you were a little bit hesitant to agree to an interview. I appreciate that you took the time to consider it and that you ultimately did decide that that you'd like to chat to us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciated your review and how you were looking at those other layers in the subtext. So that was what changed my mind. Like, these 2 people seem cool.
We
that's
are.
nice.
I'll do this. But yeah, stay in touch.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I'd love for us to come back and do a special episode on the next 3 episodes when those come out. I think that would be a great thing to revisit. So we'll definitely do that.
And I don't know how much she'll care, but please tell Kari that there's often people we pick out in podcasts that we listen to that we are like, that person, like that is the kind of soul behind the podcast. And God, wouldn't you love to sit down and have a cup of tea with them or have a pint with them or whatever? And I'm just that's my award goes to Kari for this podcast. So big shout out to her. We think she's a hero.
Oh yeah, she's amazing. Best mom.
I love that. Wow, Jeff, that was intense. That was amazing. Thrasher continued to be so open and candid with us in that interview, and I really enjoyed that chat.
Yeah, I did too. I think it was, you never really know what to expect when you have a guest on like this. And I think that was just a really great conversation. I really appreciated him being so open and sharing so much. And yeah, I feel like I said this at the end, I think, but I feel like it really did deepen my appreciation for the podcast. That was very true.
Absolutely. As a reminder to listeners, if you haven't listened yet, check out our 2 episodes on Lords of Death. There are a few before this one in your feed.
And obviously, if you haven't yet, you should definitely listen to Lords of Death podcast. You can get that at Tenderfoot or anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Before we go, a quick reminder, check us on Patreon, patreon.com/so much crime, so little time. We post all kinds of great stuff there, news on the show, outtakes, bonus clips, and more.
And also, please remember to subscribe to our show and leave us a rating on Spotify or Apple. Thank you.
And we have no more alsos left. We'll see you next time.
So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of Mind Glove Media. The executive producer is Paxton Caloriso. Our associate producer is Blythe Ty. Our theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to this show on your podcast app. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.